Carrie Kissman will share some of her findings from a collaborative research project to reduce algal blooms in local lakes.
Thanks. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my research program that studies disturbances in ecosystems. And one disturbance in particular that we have around in Wisconsin is having algal blooms in our water bodies. So this is a collaborative project with two research students and a colleague in biology, so Jim Hodgson and Kristen and Cole. So what causes algal blooms in lakes? It's called eutrophication. It's where you have too many nutrients that run off from land that go into the water and stimulate algal growth. So here you can see an example of an algal bloom in Lake Mendota in Madison, and this is a blue-green algal bloom that you see. This is actually in China. And it results in overproductivity within your system. So anyways, I'm not sure why this slide hasn't moved. We'll work on making this go forwards. Okay, so like I said, eutrophication is the result of nutrients that run off from land. They provide too many nutrients then for the food web in the lake, and they result in these nasty blooms. This is a bloom in Lake Mendota in, I'd say, the 1970s or 1980s in Madison. They're gross, they're nasty, they smell, and who wants to go swimming in this kind of a water body? And so one of the things that I've studied then is how do we make sure that this doesn't happen in our water bodies? Do you want me to just go ahead with it? I can just go ahead. So one of the other aspects associated with algal blooms is that they can have unintended effects on other parts of the food web. So when you have too many nutrients that stimulate algal blooms, the organisms within the water body can't control the population of algae. And so when the algae die, they decompose, and the microbes that decompose then use up all of the oxygen, causing fish kills. So nutrients can come in from 3 different main parts within our terrestrial land. Agriculture is the biggest contributor to excess nutrients through fertilizer. We also use fertilizer on our gardens and on our lawns, and it's also part of runoff that comes from cities. So when nutrients enter into a lake, we see that they're going to have an effect on the food web. This is a very simplified version of what the organisms look like within a water body. You have your primary producers, the algae, the grazers, the zooplankton that graze upon the algae, the small fish that eat the grazers, and then the top predator fish that eat the panfish or the mid-level predators. When you add extra nutrients, what ends up happening is it's going to stimulate the base of the food web. So then there's lots more food available, but the problem is that the grazers that generally are able to control the population of algae can't control that algae. There's a maximum amount of food that they're able to graze, and therefore that's why you have these really awful blooms. So as scientists, what can we do to help to reduce blooms in lakes? One of the ways that we can do that is by helping to reduce runoff from actually getting into these water bodies. The other way is using food web dynamics, understanding predator-prey interactions to try and control algal blooms from using our knowledge of the food webs themselves. So our first step that we can do is reducing fertilizer runoff. One of the ways to do that is to use less fertilizer. That's a pretty easy one, hard for our farmers, hard for our gardeners. We can also use fertilizer that has less phosphorus in it. Phosphorus is the one nutrient that is going to help stimulate algal growth in our freshwater bodies. Lastly, we can encourage the growth of native vegetation around our water bodies as well to prevent any of that runoff from actually making it into the water. Secondly, we can actually use food web dynamics to help us to reduce the blooms as well. So taking advantage of how we know predators controlling prey populations, and so we can actually stop top predators in our water bodies and actually have a cascading effect on the organisms below. So in a system in which you don't have a lot of top predators, the mid-level predators dominate, they eat the grazers, and those grazers can't control the algae. And then you have a lot of bloom. So that's sort of the simplified version of it. So what happens then with the water quality is it's poor. We have a lot of problems with it. But we can use food web dynamics by stocking top predators, making sure that we have ample top predators to control those mid-level fish. Then the grazer populations, who normally are eaten by these guys, are able to flourish. And then they can graze the algae, and you have nice clean water bodies. So water quality and clarity increases dramatically. So you might think manipulating a food web is kind of challenging and unethical. Manipulating has two really great benefits associated with it. One is the fact you get a really better looking water body, healthier, it's blue, it's clear, people want to use it. But you also increase the recreational fishing opportunities as well. So it can make a lot of people happy. So one of the water bodies around here, Dream Lake, is a small water body near the airport. The landowners around that water body have contacted St. Norbert and asked for help in reducing their algal blooms. And so here you can see surface algal blooms here, and the water is not as blue as we would like. So what my research students and I have been doing is been helping to reduce these blooms. First is by trying to promote less use of fertilizers and promoting the growth of native vegetation around the shoreline. Some people have not come on board. It's easier to see, but water would easily run off of this and go right into the lake. But here it gets caught up in the vegetation. The second is actually manipulating the food web. We have stocked largemouth bass, which is the top predator in this system. We've stocked them as small size, but eventually they'll grow large enough. And then using the food web dynamics as a way to reduce the blooms in the water body. Stocking has been a lot of fun. It's interesting. And as a result of this work, we've been doing a lot of monitoring. So this is us monitoring both the water clarity, so how transparent is the system? Are we seeing frequency of algal blooms? What are the population of our grazers? This is a zooplankton net. And what are our population of our fishes like as well? And so as a result, my students and I, we monitor weekly for the last 3 years. We have seen some initial positive results, which is exciting. We're seeing increased water transparency, so it's clearer, indicating that there's less algae in the water body, which is great. So reducing fertilizer and stocking top predators has been relatively good in terms of improving these components. The exciting part is that our grazers in the water body, these are the ones that can control our algal populations. They're actually more dominant in the system, and they're larger in size. When you're larger in size, you're able to graze more effectively. And so that's what's really exciting. And it's showing that there have been some improvements in the lake. And the other part about this project is it's ongoing. I have a new student called Brennan who's working on this, but it's provided excellent opportunities for our students to present at national meetings. So this is Kristen presenting at the Ecological Society of America. She also presented at NCUR as well. And I hope to continue to get more students involved in these types of projects. And so I'll introduce our last speaker today. Jamie Lynch will talk about the visual display of quantitative information.
Okay. I spend a lot of time in my research and teaching thinking about ink. Ink is a problem in my research because the journals I work with keep getting shorter and shorter. They have a limited amount of space, and they want more and more information in that smaller and smaller space. So I've started to think very carefully about how I can pack more information into less ink. And a simple way to think about this is the data-ink ratio. What we mean by this is every image, paper, object you work with has ink in it. And there's ink that conveys information, and then there's ink that doesn't convey any information. A good ink-to-data ratio has lots of important ink. A bad ink-to-data ratio has ink that isn't so helpful. It might obfuscate your argument, might distract the reader. Edward Tufte is a data scientist. He's a statistician and an artist who thinks very carefully about the visual display of quantitative information. He's created this kind of elegant idea that if all the ink presented in your image conveys information, you have kind of a beautiful or perfect image. This can work both for graphics or photos, but can also work for text or design. I want to talk about a couple of examples here today, the way I incorporate this that might be informative. Let's say that you got a table in Excel and you want to plot that thing in PowerPoint. PowerPoint makes a lot of decisions for you. It puts a background sometimes, it decides the font size that you want, and it incorporates a lot of information. So if we remove the background fill in that document, we removed ink. And by removing that ink, we've saved the printer cartridge, and we've also improved the clarity a little bit in that ink. We've upped our ink-to-data ratio, but we're still pretty poor. So eventually, after we remove the background fill, we can improve the size or the font size for some information. Let's highlight what's important and maybe de-emphasize what isn't so important. So maybe by removing, we can clarify with some more information. So after improving the font size or increasing the font size, we can mess with the lines that are in the image. So by removing the vertical lines, again, we've upped our ink-to-data ratio. By taking away, we've improved the story, we've saved some elements, we've started to improve our graphics. But we don't have to stop there. We can just keep going and keep removing lines and remove the horizontal lines from it, and I think you can see where this is going. By taking away the information, we are removing the idea that every time you present a graphic or an image, you have to present all the information or use the defaults that exist. As we slowly start to remove the ink or the non-data ink, the excess of ink, we improve our ink-to-data ratio, and then we can start presenting better and better graphics. And eventually, by removing even more of the ink, we can use gray to highlight what's more, I don't know, important. And then, after we've removed all the extraneous ink, we can go even further. A lot of times when people are using data, maybe collecting a survey, they feel an obligation to share all of the information. You don't have to share all of the information. Sometimes you can be very selective and share only the information that perhaps is most important. So by continuing to reduce and remove the ink, remove the excess information, we can improve our story by tinkering and emphasizing what's most important and not being beholden to the defaults that some of our office programs might support. Now, with tables, we can do the same thing. We can also do the same thing with visuals. If you're presenting a graphic or a slide, you might be tempted to put a lot of background fill, or have a lot of white space over here where you have a legend. You can continue to make very subtle manipulations. Removing the ink, we can remove the background fill, and our fonts will be different on my computer. And then we can implement here, and by making a clear comparison, this would be an 8 by 12 table that we can synthesize into one graphic and show the information with cleaner, and by making simple comparisons there, we negate the use of creating a 4-page table document and just show it in one picture. And as we continue to reduce, perhaps we can highlight that we know that male non-attenders to college have higher binge drinking rates from age 16 to 23 that you wouldn't be able to identify easily in a table, but you can see pretty clearly in a chart like this. The same thing happens with text. Let's say I need to give a talk, and this is an abstract from a paper I'm interested in giving pretty soon. How do I decide which piece of information is most important when I want to give the talk? Well, I look at the abstract, and then I highlight what parts I think are most important in the doc. So I literally just paste it right on there, and then I highlight the parts that I think are most important. And I think that's the crux of the story that I want to convey. Everything else might just be incidental and doesn't get to the meaning of the story. So I can start highlighting there. I ask a simple question, and then we can remove all the additional text from the document and ask a simple question. Does higher education improve health, an education gradient in health, or do the healthy become highly educated, a health gradient in education? Well, this is a question I'm really interested in, but we probably don't need any text at all to represent this, because I can just tell you that out loud. So perhaps presenting a visual of that is the simplest way to get there. Without having to remove or having people read through the information, they can just see the picture, understand the concept, and then I can tell them the importance of that information. So we can synthesize an entire abstract into just a couple words by showing a simple picture. Or you can do the inverse. Simply put all of the text together in one line and then just let itself highlight what's the most important. This would be called a wordle, where you can dump your whole document into it, and by the size and perspective of the fonts, it will show you which words are most common, which ones are most informative, and which ones are most important.
Thank you again for spending part of your Friday with us, and I'll say once more that I'd like you all to think about how and what you would present, and to email Linda at any hour of the day.